our business. We've got nice people, we got a nice place, and we've got what we consider a very competitive offer. What about the guy down the street or across town? Well, they're out there, they're doing the same thing. I got to ask you, because the consumer believes that every funeral home in America basically does the same thing. There are not really any differences. Doesn't matter if they're SCI or the local guy, whoever they are, they dump us all in the same hat. And my question for you is, what makes us different? If you go to work for a funeral home, or you currently own one, or you currently are getting ready to own one, if I walked up to any member of your staff, or you, and asked you, what makes you different? Why should people choose you rather than that turkey down the street? The guy that you think is a turkey, but is actually doing more annual business than you are in the same market. So maybe not everybody thinks the guy's a turkey. Okay, so the question is, what makes you different? What is the one element that we know will drive business one place versus the other over a long term? It's customer experiences. It's the experience of having done business with you, either as a host. I've been kind of, one of the things that I've been known a little bit for is this idea of coining the words host and guest as it relates to funerals. Well, host and guest is a common thing as it relates to weddings and other family events that occur. But as I attend a funeral at your place of business, I'm going to be influenced by what I see and what occurs there and what my experience was with you as a guest. That might sway my decision to choose you now rather than someone else when it's my turn to be a host, when I have the need for your services in the future. That's how market share gets moved in funeral homes. Now, I will tell you that today the consumer has such little information about how to make that decision to go one place or the other, that if I don't have good information or haven't had enough experience with what you do versus what they do, what's going to be my decision-making process to go? It's going to be relegated to price. Because if I don't know enough information about something, I want to limit my risk. I don't want to make a bad decision, so we'll just keep doing what we're doing, or we might get swayed away to the low-end guy who says, simple, easy, do it with us. You know, we won't ever recognize the fact that your mom ever existed on this planet, but I'll give you back to her in a box in 2 days. And that'll be $9.95. Sign here, you're making 3 copies. And there are those guys out there, there's lots of them. But there's only a certain segment of the population that's really susceptible to that offer. Most people want to acknowledge the fact that there was someone on this planet that they loved that is gone, and we need to talk about it. And we need to have an opportunity for other people who loved us to come up and give us a hug at that moment. That's what your challenge is for the future, is to create and understand the power of your service offer that causes people to continue to not only come back to you, but want to pay whatever you might want to charge them. Because the more they pay, the better off the business is, the more money you've got to reinvest, all those kind of things. Or if you want to, you just go buy a boat. It's your choice. But the investment, the reinvestment in funeral service has not been great in the last 25 years. And it's because everyone in the business is running scared. So let's talk about these things. If you're thinking about creating healing moments, I call this the 4 Ps. It's people, process, product, and place. So we're going to be talking about the 4 Ps here. Now, I'm not going to specifically designate them as such, but I'm going to allude to all of those things. People, process, product, and place. Product, by the way, is not the physical stuff that these guys offer in a very unique and interesting way. The product is what you produce that people see, and that's where I'm going to focus my attention with you this afternoon, is on the people. By the way, let me back up to that one for a moment. When I am sitting across the table from you making funeral arrangements, and I say yes to your offer, does what I'm buying exist at the time I said yes? No, right? So what am I buying when I say yes?
Promise.
I'm buying your promise that this is going to happen. This is what our place, our staff, our people, this is how we're going to create a way for you to remember your mom over the next 3 days in a controlled environment where everybody knows where you are and where to get to you and what time to get to you to say I'm sorry or whatever they might say. Or to just do nothing else but give you a giant hug. You see, that is understanding who we really are. So if you think about what we've done here, one of the things about spirituality, and I'm going to dig into this a lot with you, is that people are spiritual. If you ask people today on the street, do you believe in God? Yes. Are you spiritual? Yes. Do you go to church? Not so much. Not so much. So there's some challenges here as it relates to this, and part of it is we have historically handed off a lot of the content that people observe to some guy who may or may not have our best interest at heart. And I'm trying to be as tactful as I can, other than just calling some of these people complete morons. Because they actually stand up in front of a chapel full of people occasionally and say something like, I didn't really know old John, but I heard he was a good guy. And everybody that's sitting in that chapel full of people, whether it's in his church or whether it's in your chapel, has now just disconnected from everything else that guy's ever going to say. Because obviously, if he didn't know the deceased, or at least had enough conversation with the family before he got up there in front of them to say something positive about the deceased, or to say something at all about the deceased, then he becomes a negative reflection on you and your business. Now, we don't have a choice but to deal with it. And by the way, just to be totally transparent, every male member of my family are ministers except me. And so Thanksgiving in my house is a hoot. I don't hold back. So we're going to dig into the minister piece of this in a lot deeper here shortly. But it's a real challenge to get this right. 38% is now up to 42% of the people in the U.S. are unchurched. This is actually North American numbers. And the denominations, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, are now being replaced. The only growing religion in the denomination in the United States today is the megachurches. And are they attracting what we would in the South call lost people? Are they only attracting lost people? No, they're attracting the Episcopalians and the Methodists and the Baptists and whoever it may be that got kind of weary of the way it was being done over here, and they were attracted to the megachurch. And the megachurch in some places is gigantic. Orlando, Florida has one organization called Life Church that has one place where the minister stands on Sunday morning and does 2 services, and they have 2,500 in each of his services, and they have 8 campuses all over Orlando, where there are also 2,500 people in each of those campuses that are watching that guy on TV. He's not even live when it comes time to deliver the sermon. That's the megachurch. It's appealing. Look at how look at the pictures, how they're set up, how they address technology and use it. Here's another example of why I believe people are really spiritual and they're out there looking for something. I'm not here to dig any deeper into that than what it means to us. But this is a place that I pulled off the internet. I've actually been to this place, which is what fascinated me about it. You probably can't see a thing up there. I just keep standing right in front of you. It's from their website. You probably can't read this. Founded to become a lighthouse of peace for America and the world, the city is working to establish a permanent group of peace-creating experts whose daily practice of Maharishi's transcendental meditation and yogic flying techniques. I don't know what yogic flying techniques is, but I'm pretty confident it's not underwritten by the FAN. All right, so yogic flying techniques will promote coherent national and world consciousness and thereby prevent any negativity from arising in America or the family of nations. Yeah, now I have to ask you, where in California is it? This could only be something that would come from the land of fruits and nuts. And I'm sorry, I'm picking on you, I know.
You're not wrong.
What, say that again?
You're not wrong.
Okay. All right, so where do you think this is in California? That is in Iowa. That is in a cornfield in Iowa that used to be a 27-acre cornfield and now is a 3,000 resident town who sell everything they have on this planet and keep just enough to build these gigantic houses out there in the middle of the cornfield, and they give the rest of the money away to the group, and they live out there in peace and harmony. And it's all these executives and executive natured sorts who have given up everything they have on this planet, built them a big house out in the cornfield, and where they're going to live the rest of their days, flying around yogi flies. I don't. People are looking. People are looking for connections. They're looking for connections with community. This is a connection with a community. Many of you remember when your kids used to go out and play, and you didn't worry about what they were doing or where they were, and you knew all your neighbors by first name. I can tell you one of the things that struck me, and I always come back to this after seeing the hurricane come through in the Carolinas the last 24 hours and having dear friends of mine that are based in Wilmington. Wilmington is the home office of Live Oak Bank where I do a lot of work. And they had 250 employees evacuate on Tuesday morning so they could set up the bank remotely somewhere else, working. But they're all without a home. And so I remember during Katrina, one of the more interesting things, I live in New Orleans, and my street is the United Nations. I mean, literally, you could just about name any ethnic background, and there's one of them on my street, within about 4 blocks of each other. Not a long street. After Katrina, we were all in each other's houses, working, putting it back together. You name one, we got one. Doesn't matter. We were all just helping. You don't see that very often these days, and by the way, that didn't make the national news. Okay?
Good news.
Because it was too good news. That's right. All they could tell you about was all the nasty stuff. So let's move on. People are looking for something. Your responsibility is to create a way to create healing moments while at the same time thinking about and remembering what you're trying to do. Remembering this individual. We examined 100 services. There was nothing technically sound about this. It's not statistically accurate. We just observed 100 services and we timed them. Most of these were in New Orleans, but there were a few some other places, so it's a little bit skewed for that reason. Mostly Catholic services to some degree. 60% of the time was spent on prayer or sermons. Only 13% or 18% of the time was on eulogies. They had some music and some other, but you, as it is historical for funeral service, were almost invisible. It was if the funeral director, in most cases, didn't exist. I don't believe anybody's willing to write you a $10,000 check for what you might do for them if you're going to be invisible the rest of the time. Now, there are places where we know that somebody else needs to take charge or do their piece or do their part, but they got to know there's somebody behind the scenes running this thing that they can really depend on that is worth the 10 grand. And sometimes when we're so invisible as part of this, and when we just saw how many people are rejecting the standard formula. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend the rest of my time with you talking about what people see when they attend a funeral. And where does the content come from? Does it come from us? Does it come from the clergy? Or does it come from the family? And do you agree with me that that's most of where that content comes from? Would you agree that most of this comes from one of these 3 sources, what people see? So I'm going to focus on these 3 things, and all we're going to talk about is stuff that you're already doing or that's already being done in funeral service that you can do a little bit better and have a tremendous impact on the people you serve or the people that you're going to serve. So let's start with the family. The family gives us raw material. They walk in with raw material, whether it's either in their head or whether it's the response of an interaction with you. They have raw material, and we're never going to be able to get to wherever we need to be with them to remember their mom or their dad or their lost loved one appropriately unless you get some of that raw material. Agree? And we've got to figure out how to get it. And so part of what has to be taught here and part of what's have to be implemented out there is this interaction with the client where we understand what they really want and who their loved one really was. Without that information, None of this really matters. We can't gear a piece of merchandise towards their Irish heritage unless we know they were from Ireland, you know, or unless we know something about who they are beyond that. And we start beginning to dig into who this person was. You see, the difference between a good funeral director and a bad one used to be whether they didn't wreck a hearse or they were on time. That was basically what we measured success based on. But in the last 20 years, that has begun to seriously evolve into this celebration thing. Now, what you will see in my slides is you'll never hear the word celebration. I don't like it. If my 18-year-old was just killed in a car wreck, I ain't celebrating nothing. Okay? And so the word celebration, broadly applied, means it applies to the stillborn and the 16-year-old who was killed in a car wreck. None of that really works for the celebration term. I think the term is remembrance. Because a remembrance can apply to all the way across the board, even to a 92-year-old that we were expecting to pass away, who lived an amazing, wonderful life and now has 13 great-grandkids. See, that can apply across the board. We have to be careful even about the terminology we use and how we approach things. I've got so much ripping through my head right now that I'd like to talk about, but I'm not. So I want to stick to the plan. So we're going to talk about these three things as it relates to the family and the information they have and how we can take it, find it, deliver on it, and then enable all the people we work with to do something positive with it. So let's dig into that a little bit. Here's one of the challenges. All of you now have seen or do video tributes, right? You do video tributes? You do them? Yep. You guys seen them or are doing them?
Yep.
I know you guys do them.
Yep.
We roll pictures past, right? So this is a video tribute. We got a video tribute. You're coming in as a guest, and the video tribute's rolling by. How long do you leave the pictures on the screen when you're doing a video tribute? How long does the picture stay up before it goes to the next one? Depending on how many pictures you got. 13 seconds or even as little as 7 or 8 seconds, right? So we got a video tribute rolling by here. So this video tribute has this picture in it, or others, numerous of them. You could have as many as 50 or as little as 20 or maybe as little as 10. So the video tribute's ripping by. Don't look at me, look at that. Okay? And then it goes away, right? Others go around. I kept that one up there more than 13 seconds. So now others pass by, other pictures, and then it rotates, right? Maybe a 20-minute loop, something like that, and the picture comes back up. There it is again. It goes by. I'm leaving that up there more than 13 seconds on purpose. And then it goes away again. What'd you see? What'd you see? What happened? What was in the picture? What was it?
Hugging.
Hugging? What'd you see? You saw hugging? What'd you see?
Hugging.
Only hugging?
Yeah.
Through a window.
We saw a window.
Yeah.
What'd you see? What'd you guys see?
Window.
A window. I've had people tell me they saw baseball gloves. I've asked this question to hundreds of your colleagues nationwide when I do this, and the response, I saw an angel. What did you see, Jane?
No, hugging in the window.
A couple of people hugging in the window? What, anybody see anything different?
I thought it was a ghost.
A ghost?
It looked like a ghost.
You thought it looked like a ghost? Could have been. Okay. That may say something about your psyche.
I know that.
Okay. And I like it. All right, so the fact is there's all kinds of possibilities. Here's what you know. You don't have a clue what that picture means. You have no idea what that picture means or stands for. You know nothing about it. So what you do is if you don't tell me the story about that picture, somebody's making up the story in their head. You all now have a different story in your brain about what that picture represents. Correct?
Yeah.
We're taking the very thing that we know can tell the story, the very pictures, photography of these people's lives, and we're allowing it to be misused because we're not telling the story about the pictures. If there's more than one person, now would you agree with me that if there's one person in the picture on a video tribute, that it's not a hard correlation between my brain that I can say that's probably the dead guy. You know, it may be the dead guy at 6 years old, but I can make, if there's one picture in the video tribute and I'm going into Mr. Smith's deal, I'm thinking that's probably Mr. Smith. But if there's more than one picture, a person in the picture, there may be something that needs to be explained. Especially when it's bizarre or it's not clear like this one is. This is a true story. That is that guy hugging his mama. And his buddy was inside the bus station and just happened to snap the picture through the window from the inside of the bus station where he was leaving to go to boot camp, eventually to Vietnam. The next time she saw him was in a box when he came home. So why don't you caption the pictures and tell me the story? If you get anything out of my stuff this afternoon, get this. Your responsibility as a successful funeral professional from now until eternity will be to tell me the story. It is now what Legacy Tributes is basing an entire new operation on. Is products and services that, and other products, not just caskets and merchandise, but other stuff that help prompt people, visually prompt, verbally prompt from you to tell me the story. Because if you're going to be good at this and you want people to come back to you and pay you a lot of money for a long time, you got to be good at telling the story. One of the ways you can do that is to caption the videos. Video captioning, by the way, is not hard to do with today's technology. It's not hard at all. Belle's life changed forever when Rick was killed in Vietnam. She cherished this picture of the two of them accidentally taken through a window by one of Rick's guys. See, sometimes the pictures can even tell the story themselves when there's more than one person in there, right? What's happened? What's happened?
They all shaved their heads.
Say it again.
They all shaved their heads.
Why?
Somebody
I'm
had cancer.
assuming one of them was sick, and
Say it again.
I'm assuming one of the three was sick and
Yeah, the normal assumption is what?
shot.
Yeah, the little guy's got cancer and the two guys. So sometimes captioning can just help support the picture. You know, it says Bob and Tom shaved their heads in solidarity with Bruce as he started his second round of chemotherapy. Sometimes the pictures can be just supported by the captions when there's more than one person in the picture. But some of you are already thinking ahead here. Watch how the caption, just watch right here, how the caption changes this picture. Bob and little Tommy shaved their heads in solidarity with Bruce. This is the guy with cancer. But the assumption would always be, if you just see the picture, that this guy, the little guy's the one that's got cancer. Tell me the story. Figure out ways to get better with information and data and effort that you're already doing. You're already doing video tributes, just get better at it. Okay? One more. It's okay for these things to be funny. If the person that you're remembering was a character, and their family at one point in the arrangement conference was laughing about something their mom or dad did their whole lives, or whatever it was that caused them to remember them so positively at that moment that they were laughing, it's okay for this stuff to be funny. It doesn't have to be so freaking serious all the time. If that person was a character, tell me she was a character. In this case, yes, that's me.
I know.
Okay, that's me. That's me right after I just had a haircut. Okay, so I'm not kidding. So, you know, it's okay. After the regrettable incident with the beaver pelt, Doug's hair was never quite as good. I mean, just tell me the story. You know, and it's okay for it to be funny. We've got a lot to share with you because we've got to move on. Eulogies are the biggest unutilized opportunity in funeral service today. The absolute biggest unutilized opportunity. Eulogies, if you implementing a eulogy into a funeral service is having someone stand up and read the tribute, the obituary tribute that was either on your website or in the paper, you don't waste their time. A eulogy is not reading the obituary, which is what many ministers like to do. She was survived by that, she went to high school, you know, do something with that gets me further than that. Literally the eulogy is the real opportunity for us to really, really dig in with who that person was. It's a start. So I will warn you, flip the switch, Jim, if you don't mind. I will warn you in advance. I'm only gonna do this for the videos, but I want you to be able to see them well. I will warn you in advance, this is one of the most powerful examples of a eulogy I've ever seen.
Mrs. Lee, I believe you have some words to say about the dearly departed.
I'm not going to sing praises for my late husband. Not today. Neither am I going to talk about how good he was. Enough people have done that here. Instead, I want to talk about some things that will make some of you feel a bit uncomfortable. First off, I want to talk about what happened in bed. Ever had difficulty starting your car engine in the morning? Well, that's exactly what David's snoring sounded like. But wait, snoring wasn't everything. There was also this rear end wind action going on as well. Some nights, it would be so forceful, it would wake him up. What was that? He would ask. Oh, it's the dog, I would say. Go back to sleep, dear. Oh, you might find this all very funny, but towards the end of his life, when his illness was at its worst, these sounds indicated to me that my David was still alive. And what I wouldn't give, just to hear those sounds again before I sleep. In the end, it's these small things that you remember, the little imperfections that make them perfect for you. So to my beautiful children, I hope one day you too find yourselves life partners who are as beautifully imperfect as your father was to me.
Was I right? Look, I've seen that thing 100 times. It gets me every time I watch it. Let me just say this to you in its simplest terms. If that doesn't strike you at the very core of who you are and why you're thinking about doing this, or why you've been doing it for 40 years, if that doesn't really strike you at your core, you're in the wrong place. That's who we are. It's what we do. It's the stuff we help create. In Southern terms, I might say that a little different. We might say, if this doesn't fire you up, your wood's wet. So, I mean, there's ways to understand the power. By the way, this was not done by funeral service. This was done in Singapore by the Ministry of Youth and Culture in our country to support the diversity, because you've got an Indian woman eulogizing her Oriental husband in English in Singapore. It was there, you notice the very last thing it said was family? That was not about funeral service, but wasn't it about what we do? You see, we understand the technical piece of the business that can occur, and understanding and learning that is important. What you do to a deceased, a dead human is important. It's important work. I've lost both of my parents in the last 9 years. I can tell you that the guy that I was holding his hand when he took his last breath was not the same guy I saw in the casket 3 days later when we had the first viewing. He looked like he was 55 years old again. My dad. But I can tell you, if that's all you have, it's a small nail to hang your hat on today. Especially if 50% of your people are rejecting that outhandedly. It's a real challenge. And so I show you these things to get you in the right frame of mind. And using the eulogy. Now, you can't always count on somebody stepping up to the mic and doing what she did. You cannot. There should never be anything as such as an open mic at a funeral. That's a bad idea. Okay? You can't control the time, and you also can't control what's said. Because then you get the ex-wife stepping up to the mic and looking over at the new stepmom, who happens to be 26 years her junior, and looking over at the two of them in the middle of the funeral and say, well, you've got him, but I got the money. And your whole service just took a giant nosedive right into the ground. So you can't have open mic, but eulogies can be a real opportunity to do something better. And by the way, where is it written that all the eulogies have to be one right after the other? That if somebody's going to have something to say, we're going to have 3 kids that have something to say, and they're all going to say it right in a row. Or somebody else. Why don't you have somebody come up at the start and get the thing going, maybe with a prayer or whatever, depending on if it's a religious service or not. And then one of those people who has known this guy since he was 6 years old steps up and says something about it. Short, concise, what that guy meant to him, and he's known him now for 73 years. And then you have music and a prayer or whatever else might be going on, and then somebody else steps up and says something else. They worked with him for the last 25 years of his working career or whatever. Then you do other stuff, and you do that. Break it up. Make it interesting. Create something, again, that people are going to remember, that might cause them to choose you as a guest instead of who they're historically committed to. This is how you move market share in funeral service. Here's another example. Videos are wonderful these days to help us tell the story in a video tribute or using stock footage. But I have to caution you a little bit about just using stock footage. Footage is great. It gives visual interest. It causes people to pay attention to what's on the screen a little bit more rather than just a video tribute with pictures rolling by without it. However, by the way, if you can't really see it, this is stuff I just jerked off the internet. That says Getty Images right there in real fine. These are stock footage that's out there. But I will tell you that if my mom wasn't a beach person, you throw in a video of a beach in between her pictures and the video tribute may or may not cause it to connect. That's just a cautionary thing from me. So I want to share with you one more thing before we get maybe just about to the halfway point here that has to do with me personally. I want to share with you one of the more intensely personal things I've ever done in one of these presentations, but I've been using this now for over 5 years. My mom was an interesting human being. High school education. For 45 years, she was the chief court clerk of probate court in Birmingham, Alabama. I was raised in Alabama. Can you tell? I don't exactly sound like I'm from Boston. And so my mom was a very interesting person who had really grown in her life and became something important. She knew attorneys all over the South. My stepdad is one of the people who is totally rejected death. I mean, on a number of occasions. My stepdad has had Legionnaire's disease for 50 years. He has had 15% lung capacity for 50 years. And he's a Baptist minister. He's never stopped preaching. 5 times in the last 8 years, if you think all the baby boomers and all the dead people, all those numbers we were talking about earlier, he's another one of those guys who just continues to defy the odds. 5 times in the last 8 years. I've been called either by my brother who lives there, a couple of my kids still live there, and one of my step brothers lives there. I've been called by one of them 5 times in the last 8 years to get to Birmingham as quick as I could get there because my stepdad, Harold, is either not gonna make it through the night or not gonna make it through the weekend. And 2 weeks ago, he preached for a buddy of his as a substitute minister. It's amazing. He's a guy who refuses to give up life. And I love him. And love him. He was married to my mom for 37 years. He goes to the doctor a lot because of his circumstances. My mom was with him at his doctor. They finished with Harold. My mother tells the guy on November the 10th, this is November the 10th, 2009. November the 10th, 2009, my mom tells his doctor about a problem she's really been having. He puts her on the examination table, does an exam of her, takes Harold, my stepdad, out into the hall, tells him what he thinks it is, puts her in the hospital, November the 10th. November 17th, they confirmed what the doctor had told my dad, or told my stepdad. On November the 18th, we took her home. November the 29th, she's gone. She could have been killed in a car wreck and it wouldn't have been any worse for us. 11 days. On October the 24th, just prior to the November the 10th trip to the doctor with my stepdad, for the first time in our lives, my brother, who's a high school coach and minister in Fort Worth, Texas, had an open weekend during the middle of his football season, and we decided it would be a really cool thing because my mom had watched us go to the games for our entire life. I'm a big Bama fan. Get over it. Okay, so I go to the Bama, we go to the Bama games a lot as family get-togethers. That's how we use our falls to get together. But on this occasion, on October the 24th, my mom went to the Alabama-Tennessee game with me and my brother. At one point during the game, my mother was standing up screaming at the ref over a bad call. She didn't even know what was going on out there. It's just who she was. And literally, just over a month later, she's gone. After we took her home, Harold and I have been talking about, my stepdad is Harold. You're going to see him on video in just a minute. So we've been talking about what would we do. She was right there. And we're right here talking about what we're going to do on her service. One of the things we talked about for years was, why don't we interview people about what she meant to them? So we had our visitation. We were expecting a big crowd. She knew every attorney in the Southeast. We were expecting a big crowd. The funeral director was expecting a big crowd. He gave us the whole funeral home for the night, and thank God he did. 650 people showed up for her visitation. We were expecting 300. I printed up 800 memorial folders that we were going to give out at the visitation and then at the service the next day. I thought that was more than enough. And almost all of them were gone just at the visitation. But we made a list of people that knew her well, from all walks of her life. No family. If you put family on this list, you'll screw this up. Let me explain why. Okay, you can't put family on there because then everybody else in the family feels obligated to do it and they do a bad job. It's just like a eulogy. If they stand up one family member, they all feel compelled to stand up and say something stupid. It doesn't work, okay? But we made a list of 12 people that we thought would be at her visitation, and all 12 of them showed up from all walks of life. When one of them would come in the back door of the chapel, this long line of people, the funeral director told me at one time there were 350 people standing in line just to get to us. When they came in the back door, my kids, all my grown kids, my kids are the age of most of you in this room, I'd say, that's Judge Reynolds, go get him. And they would go pull Judge Reynolds out of the line and take him down to an empty visitation room down the hall where my buddy Paul Seiler had a camera set up where he interviewed all those people about what my mom had meant to them in their lives on video. At the end of the night, all 12 of them did it. All 12 of them showed up. All 12 of them did it. At the end of the night, I've got an hour and 10 minutes of the most powerful video of your mom you could ever have. And in my case, it was my mom. You couldn't give me $1 million for it. I wouldn't give it to you. Overnight, we edited the video. And all 12 of those people, by the way, 800 people showed up for her service the next day. You normally have, right? You normally have less people show up for the service than show up for the visitation. Well, this was the other way. We had 800 people show up in the second largest Baptist church in the state of Alabama. That's who she was, is what she was about. You'll see this. And in the middle of a very, very staunchly religious service, we had 4 ministers. We sang hymns. That's who she was, right? We did all the normal things you might do on a very exclusively religious service. I can't tell you how many times we prayed, but it was a bunch. And yet, right in the middle of this very religious event, flip that right switch, we did this.
One of the greatest things any of us could receive from this life is for other people to say they were better off for having known us. We are all better for having known Peggy Carter. Last night we asked a few people who knew her well what they remembered most about their relationship with Peggy. Here are some excerpts of what they said.
I lived across the street from the land trips, so I was 3 years older than Peggy. But we were raised in the same neighborhood. Of course, after we got out of school and I went off to college, I lost contact with her. But then when I came back and practiced law, I knew her as a clerk at the probate court. And I was practicing law, and I would see her up there pretty regular because I did a lot of probate work. Subsequently, I became the probate judge, and then she worked for me for 20-odd years. And she was my chief clerk. And we retired together the same day. They say she was kind of like a sister. I would say she's kind of like a wife, but Harold could get on me. She never lost her cool. She was always on top of every man that came up and supervised everything that went on. She knew every facet of the probate court. It was a wonderful person to be in charge.
I remember the first time I met Peggy. I was a new lawyer, green as green could be, and frightened to death of the courthouse. I inherited probate practice from my dad, but I really knew nothing about practicing probate law. And I remember the voice of my dad, Arthur Shores, who told me, if you ever have any problems, you go see Peggy Proctor. She'll help you.
I have known Peggy and Harold for probably about 20 years. I met them when they had the Huffman Baptist Singles Department, and they were just such a joy. We met so many people that came through that department, and a lot of the men, they wanted to go into the younger class. Well, that didn't sit too well with Miss Peggy. So she would be running over into the younger. She said, I think that you would be happier if you came on into this other class, because I think that your age would fit more with these girls in here. And we all laughed about it, because each time one would come in, we'd say, I wonder if he's going to get by Miss Peggy. And not many things got by Miss Peggy.
One thing that she always got me with, and she did the same thing to Harold. We did, if we were digging, we'd be sitting around just kidding with each other and digging at each other. She'd take that little bitty fist and she'd look at it. She'd say, you see this? She said, I'm going to take it. I said, Harold always said, well, I can barely see it. She said, well, this thing will send you to the moon. You're going to say, if you want the trip, you just keep it up, But Peggy, that was just Peggy's fun side. She was a lot of fun.
Peggy was always smiling. And there's a lot to be said about people who smile at other people and what that smile can do. She embraced everybody that came to her and needed help. She never made you feel like you should know something that you didn't know. And she was just a warm, genuinely warm and personable human being. I wish we had a few more like her these days.
show that to you for a couple, I will tell you, sometimes it's hard for me to watch that in others, and it's coming up on 9 years. So this never gets any easier, it just gets different. My relationship with her still exists. It's just not like it was before. But now let me ask you this, because this is the important question of why I share this with you. Do you know my mother right now better than you did when you got here today? Everyone who leaves any event you ever create must leave that place of business knowing more about the deceased when they leave than they did when they got there. That is your calling. It is your responsibility. It is who you are. It's what you do. And I don't know how you do it every time. It is not easy. You got these people sitting across the desk from you with their eyes crossed and their legs crossed and their ears crossed and doing this. I don't want anything you got. I don't even want to be here. And it's very difficult to go from that to something that powerful. 800 people, I remember you saw, I was the one who introduced this. This was right after I'd had a few things to say from a eulogy standpoint about my mom. That I knew that nobody sitting in that audience of 800 people knew except me and my brothers. And it was hilarious. It was funny stuff. She was a character. But the fact is, I introduced that in the middle of a religious service. There was nothing religious about that, was there? Now, it was not inappropriate. It was not the wrong thing to do. But where is it written that we got to do exclusively religious or exclusively secular? A mix of the both is who people are. People came up to me afterwards, after this thing was over. I had a Muslim couple. I'm standing up on the podium at this thing. You saw me up there with all the ministers and all those people that were up there. By the way, one of those ministers was my stepdad, who stepped up to the mic and started his wife's funeral by saying, we were throwing a party for Peggy here today, and she was a no-show. Because she got a better offer. That's how he started her service. That's my stepdad. You'll see him in a minute. So the point of this is, people came up to me afterwards. I had a high school buddy of mine that worked for my brother, who came up to me afterwards and said, I remember when your mother, he hugged me, and we hadn't seen each other in 25 years. He hugged me and reminded me of who he was, because neither one of us looked exactly the same. And he said, do you remember when your mother did this or that for us when we were kids and the stuff we did at the church and so forth? And I said, yeah, that's awesome. He turned around and started walking away from me, and he stopped and came right back and said, let me ask you something. I said, what's that? He said, how the hell did you do that? I said, what do you mean? He said, look, you know, when you get to be our age, you start attending all the funerals of all the parents of your high school buddies. Our parents start dying off. And now, of course, when you get a little bit older than we were even then, now our high school friends are starting to die away. Some of you have experienced that, I know. He said, I've been to 11 funerals in the last 6 years. I ain't never seen anything like that. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that what you're looking for? It requires energy and effort to do it. Now, I will tell you, the first one of these you do is hard. But the more you do them, the easier it gets. I'm not suggesting you go ripping out and hire some videographer to go doing this stuff for you. I'm suggesting that you got to do this kind of stuff to connect people in that audience. So I'm standing up there on the steps where the high school buddy encountered me. He walked away, and where I'm watching the grandchildren, the grandsons, load the casket in the back of the hearse. They picked the casket up and went bang right into the side of the hearse. Just totally missed the opening. And I'm thinking, you know, everybody's thinking, oh. Well, I'm thinking, that's the funniest thing I've seen today, and my mom would probably think that was hilarious. And so, you know, so I'm standing up on the stage. One more story about this. I'm standing on the stage, and I look out into that audience of 800 people, and two obvious people in the group kind of stood out to me. There were two women in burqas. This is in a giant Baptist church. So I sought out the two women in burqas. After the service was over, they happened to be walking out while I'm standing up there watching the debacle, loading the casket. I'm standing up there, and they walked up to me, and I said, ladies, I'm so glad that you came, but I got to ask, what are you doing here? They work with my mother at the Crisis Center. Do you think that anything that was going on in the course of that staunchly religious Baptist church service was connecting with them in any way except that video? You see, we're thinking of this sometimes from the standpoint of what's in our heads or even what's in the family's heads. But all of us have a broad sphere of influence, and on any given day, sitting in that chapel full of people will be just like my neighborhood. It'll be the United Nations sitting out there. And all walks of not only religious, but all walks of ethnic life are going to be sitting in that chapel. You have to do stuff that you know is going to connect with everyone there. And again, what's the real crux of our afternoon together? Tell me the story. Let's move on. Thanks for letting me do that. Oh, I threw this in here. Remember I said we did have a video tribute going on in the visitation as well. Remember I said if there's one picture in the video tribute, you assume that's the deceased? Well, that's a picture of my mom, but even in this case, I would suggest to you that captioning the picture still helps, doesn't it? Because that's a picture of my mom when she was 12 years old. It's on my desk right now. You see, the point of this is even if it's just one person in the picture, you might be able to tell me a little more about the story. There's all kinds of things you can do. Memorial folders has been something we've used. I find it's interesting. Okay, I can pick on you because you're the only African American person in here. Okay, right now.
No, I'm not.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna single you out. So here we go. Let me ask you this: how long has African Americans been putting the picture of a deceased on the outside of a memorial folder? Since the invention of a Xerox machine, they've been putting the picture of a deceased on the outside of a memorial folder. Lily White Funeral Service in the United States in the last 10 years has decided, what a great idea! Hell, you guys have been doing it for 25 freaking years. And we think it's an innovation. Let's put the picture out there. They've been doing it forever. There should be some cross-pollination going on here. A little cross-over learning would be a really good thing, wouldn't it? Okay, so we put the picture out there now. We put this stuff in there about the service. Well, here's Peg's. Okay, we did this a little bit differently because all those people that were standing in line, the key of this point is the timing. When do you give out the memorial folder? Normally at the service. Rarely do we give these out at the visitation. I'm suggesting to you that we gave these out at the visitation. Now, it's got the order of worship for what's going to happen in the service tomorrow in there, but it also had an 8-page editorial of her entire life with pictures, just like they were reading it in the paper. So all those people standing in line who are just waiting to get to us, now they've got something to read. What do people say when they get to the front of the chapel to you? What do they say if you're the child of the deceased? What are they going to say to me? I'm sorry for your loss. That's all they know to say, right? Let me tell you a little, this has nothing to do with this, but it does. If you don't get anything else out of this afternoon, don't ever use those words in your lifetime in this business. Never, ever say to a client that you're serving, I'm so sorry for your loss. They are going to hear that 150 times from everybody they talk to related to their mom over the next 3 days. You need to be professionally different. I know this is a difficult time for you and your family, but I want you to know you came to the right place and I'm here to help you. That's what you need to be saying. Something like that that makes sense for you. Okay? They're going to hear, I'm so sorry for your loss, over and over and over again, and you just become one more of them if you say the same thing. Say something professionally different to make a difference. Or arm them with something that tells me about the deceased before they ever get to you. People were walking up to me at the front of the chapel and saying, your mom was quite a character, wasn't she? Because they had read this stuff before they ever got to us. People who didn't even know my mother but knew my stepdad were there, right? People who didn't know my mother but knew me or my 3 brothers were there. But they learned about her before they ever got to us. Now that didn't keep some of them from saying it again, but it also gave them ammunition. People don't know what to say. Give them ammunition. Give them information. By the way, there was an article, there's part of this article My mother was about 12 years old when World War II was going on, and both of her brothers were in France in World War II. And so they had a group of women in their community that would write letters to all of their guys who were serving in World War II in France, or in England and France. When they all came home after the war was over, they all started looking for my mother's older sister. Because my mother had written letters as a 12-year-old to all these guys in their community all over France and signed her sister's name to them all. So all these guys came home after the war looking for her, and she didn't send a letter at all. So this is the kind of stuff you got to know, right? So tell me that stuff. To end this piece of this, because we're getting close on time already. Got a lot to go yet. Okay? To end this piece of where we are, here's what I would say. Don't play it safe. We are a business that loves to focus on the minor issues. Remember the Indian woman you just saw a few minutes ago? The eulogy? There's somebody going to walk up to you after that woman has that amazing thing to say in your chapel, and somebody's going to walk up to you as the funeral director afterwards and say something like, you know, I don't think she should have said that. There's always 2 or 3 naysayers in every group. You know what I'm talking about? Some of you that own funeral homes, that professional funeral goer that shows up on a regular basis expecting you to do the same damn thing every time. And all suddenly you do something sort of out of the ordinary and they get freaked out about it and they're going to come tell you about it and whine about it. Don't let 3 negatives screw up 100 good ones. I'd rather have 97 A's and 3 D's than 100 C's. Take the chance. We don't take chances because we're scared to death going to make somebody mad or upset somebody. Do it and apologize later. Because there were 97 people in that chapel that loved what you did and 3 morons that you can't fix. Don't manage your business to the 3 morons. It's a real challenge for us in funeral service because we want everybody to be happy. We can't. Neither can any other business. We're in the restaurant business. My son and I are in the restaurant business in Birmingham. We can't make everybody happy there, but I can sure make enough of them happy to make a nice living. Don't worry about it. There's always going to be naysayers. Is it meaningful? Is it appropriate? Is it affordable? If it fits those categories, do it. If you can pull it off and it's legal, do it. Okay? Figure it out. Your role is education and reassurance, but I will tell you, you got to have the courage of your convictions, of your professional convictions to do it. And many times I would even suggest to you that there are occasions where you need to do stuff just because you know it will have an impact that the family doesn't know you're going to do. Don't hesitate to take that chance. You could have an impact on somebody that they'll never ever forget you for. A good funeral director today takes the answers they receive from the family and they create something with it that they will never forget you for, that they wouldn't have thought about doing themselves. Most families are screwed up at that moment. They should be. It's up to you to be the creative piece of this. And it's difficult. We have a business full of what I would call learned craftsmen. Embalming is important, but it's not all. All the things we can do with a dead human are important, but they're not all. And so we have learned craftsmen out there who can do it the same way over and over. But now it's like a blacksmith. They hammer out the horseshoe the same way every time. Now we're asking that learned craftsman today in this environment to be an inspired artist. I don't want you to make a horseshoe, I want you to draw me a picture of a horse. And they come back with something that looks like a cat or an aardvark or something, It's just outside of their skill set. And so we have to understand that we all have roles in this. Let's go a different direction.